everybody. Welcome to Green Rush Consulting webinar. This is our special on the Illinois FAQs. I am Sarah Setti. I'm co-founder and Chief Strategy Officer of Green Rush Consulting.
Just a heads up.
And I am going to be introducing Lauren Payne, our Senior Regulatory Analyst, who has over 10 years experience in the regulatory and compliance space, working on merit-based applications. She herself has worked in 17 different states and 13 cities and has been very successful in helping our teams and many teams navigate this really complex regulatory process. So we're excited to dig into the FAQs today. The purpose of this is, these are the FAQs that are coming out for the current process in Illinois, which are for a couple different license types, being craft grower infusion or infuser, and transportation. Did I get them all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so these are the FAQs, or the question and answers that the state has provided. Every state provides an opportunity for us to ask them questions, and then they provide us answers. They don't always provide us the answers, or they don't always provide us answers that are clear. So we're going to help to distill that for you. And I invite you to use the Q&A or chat box that should be on the bottom there. And also, I do just want to mention that apologies for those who wanted to come on yesterday. It seems that there were technical difficulties with Comcast nationwide, so that's great. So here we are, and basically how this is going to go. I'm going to roll through the FAQs that came from the state asking LP these questions. And any of the questions that you guys have, please, share that with us. Ask us the questions so we can be sure to address those to the full group. So, LP, do you have anything to say before we dig into the questions?
I'm very happy to be here. I love explaining and discussing this stuff. It's all so incredibly complex in a way that is totally unnecessary, and it's frustrating that the states don't provide more clear information about how to navigate these processes. So I really love being able to help people with it.
Yay, thanks LP. Oh, and if I call Lauren LP, that's what we call her around the office. So we're gonna dive right into one of the already most asked questions that we've received, which is question number 8, if we're looking at how the state responded, which is, does an applicant need a physical location to apply? Does the applicant need a building already constructed? LP, you wanna take that away?
Absolutely. So a proposed location is required. I just wanted to clarify one thing. We're working from the Q&As that the state released. I sent the link in the chat box in case you wanted to follow along. We're in the general section of the Q&As from round 1. And it's question number 8. We're going to skip some of the ones that are more apparent, where the state just responded with basically the instructions from the application, because that's not very useful. So as far as whether or not you need a physical location to apply, I wanted to clarify something from our prior webinar. It is. You do need a physical location. The building doesn't need to already be constructed, but you do need to identify a facility location. It can be an empty piece of land. It can be a piece of land that you don't have a lease for yet, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you have to make plans to build on that, and you have to tell the state what those plans are. So as far as the application is concerned, you have to submit a few things for exhibits N and O to prove to the state that you do actually have this facility identified. Again, and you don't have to actually have the lease, but you have to be in conversation with the owners of the property. The state requires that you submit two types of information. And I'm going to discuss this in a way that the state didn't. I'm going to try and make it a little bit more clear. There are two things you have to prove. You have to prove that you have access to land from the moment that you get licensed through at least December 31st, 2021. So somehow you have to prove that you have access to that land, and I'll discuss ways that you can prove that in a minute. And then the second thing that you have to prove is that anyone with a claim on that land, including your bank if it's mortgaged, or people who might get the land when the previous owner passes away, anybody, or lien holders, if there's a lien on the property, anyone who might have a claim on that land also has to be notified, as well as the original owner. And not just notified that something's happening, but that they agree and are aware that this is a cannabis facility and that's cool with them. So the way that you prove that you have access to the land can be any number of ways, including an actually executed lease that's either post-dated or even now, but I know nobody wants to be paying payments on a lease for right now if they're not operating. You can also execute an intended lease or a memo of understanding, which is an MOU, an intent to commit to working on this. There's a ton of different ways that you can prove that you will have access to that land. It could be as simple as a letter saying, I'm the owner of this property. I intend to lease this property to this particular applicant by the time they get their license. And we will let them use the property through at least December 31st, 2021. All that information needs to be on that letter. If you own the property, then it's the deed showing that you own the property. If it's your mom that owns the property and she says it's cool, just get a letter from the owner of the property, your mom, get the deed with her name on it, and then get a letter from her saying that she is going to lend it to you for free, or not for free, but without a lease, that will last from the time you get licensure through at least December 31st, 2021. I hope that that kind of clarifies a little bit of what you need to do. There's a lot of complicated language in that particular exhibit, and I wanted to really boil it down to proving you have access to that property, and it doesn't have to be a legal document. It can just be a single note.
Oh, great. That was going to be actually my question. So this is not something that an attorney needs to create for you. It just needs to be, does it need to be certified in any way?
Nope, it doesn't seem to need any of that stuff, but it should say that it should say the applicant name in it.
Okay.
And it should definitely have that that date, December 31st, 2021. And then the letter should also have the second part, which is you have to prove that anyone with a claim on the land knows that this is being used for a cannabis establishment and is okay with that. Okay. So you can add that to that letter, or it can be a second letter. But yeah, to prove that anyone with a claim on the land knows what you're doing, it's a letter as well. It doesn't have to be a legal document. I want to flag for you guys that this includes mortgagees and mortgagors. So if you are leasing from someone who has a mortgage on the property, so he's not paid it all off yet and the bank still holds a note, he's got to notify the bank. And the bank has to sign a letter saying that they know that it's being used for cannabis entities and that that's okay. That can be tricky with banks. So you really need to be upfront when you're talking to realtors or brokers or even banks about this stuff, about the purpose of it, because you don't want to spend hours and days and weeks finalizing an agreement about a piece of property and then find out that the bank's not willing to sign that document. So just make sure your realtor is very aware of that particular concern.
Yeah, great distinction. And this is for all license types.
This is for all license types in Illinois right now.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the questions that we're getting in the office is the necessary zoning for the transportation license. This is not on the sheet here and you might not know it, but if you do you know anything about the necessary zoning for, like, what should we be looking for the zoning for these different licenses?
We're going to get into zoning in a little bit, but I will say that there are no state requirements for zoning. The only state requirement, and I'll explain it more later, the only state requirement as far as zoning is concerned is related to the local zoning authority saying that it's okay that this is happening and that they're aware that it's happening and it's fine with them.
Okay, great. All right, so let's go on to the next question then. I'm gonna hop to question 11. Are there formatting requirements for the application and the exhibits? Are there limitations in terms of page size, font, and file type? We touched on this a little bit during our first one, and now they're giving a more of an answer. So what say you, LP?
I'm going to boil this down. There are page limits that are in place for most of the exhibits, and you'll find those on the application. If you have trouble finding what page limits are for each exhibit, let us know and we'll let you know. But I think you guys are all aware of that. As far as the rest of it's concerned, they said we don't have a preference. That means that you want it to be legible and you want to keep your reviewer happy when they're reading, 300 pages in a day. You want them to be able to read it easily and have it make sense and have them find information easily. That means you want it to be 12 points font at least or bigger, 12-point font or bigger. And we generally recommend Times New Roman just because it's a familiar font and it will look familiar to the reviewers. However, you can use whatever font you want as long as it's legible. And then as far as margins are concerned, if you're really having a page limit problem and you need to get a little bit more space, you could move your margins out to about 0.75. I want to flag for you guys that every once in a while in these processes, someone will ask the question of the state, what are the margin limits? And the state will give us an answer that we don't like. So don't ask that question because they're probably going to say 1 inch.
Yeah.
But also be aware that keep an eye on the Q&As. When the next round of Q&As come out, we'll discuss this again to let you guys know if any margins have been mentioned. But we prefer 1 inch if at all possible.
That's an important thing to note during this FAQ process, right? Is like, sometimes you may not actually want to ask the question if you don't want the answer. So, just kind of putting that out there. Real quick, is there another submission round for frequently asked questions to the state? Okay.
Yes, there is. I believe it's still active right now. I'm going to look and see what the deadline is for it. I'm sorry, 1 moment.
That's all right. I kind of threw that one at you out of order here, just out of curiosity.
They have to be submitted by January 28th.
Okay.
And they will be released February 4th. So get your questions into the state. Send them as many as you have. It's great to ask. They may not respond to them, but it's good to ask.
Okay, thank you, LP. Let's do question number 12. Are tax records the only documentation that can be used to prove Illinois residency?
Actually, Sarah, I want to jump in and go back to the last question for one more thing. If you're going to submit a question to the state and you're trying to find how to submit the question to the state, it took me a little while to find it. It's actually in the application documents itself. It's on the first page of the application. It's not anywhere that I could find on the website. So you have to actually open up the application to get the email address of where to send those questions. So.
Oh, that's fun. All right.
Yeah, it's really unnecessarily obtuse.
Yeah.
Question number 12 for the tax records and documentation for Illinois residency. This is actually an exciting answer. They refuse if any of you worked on dispensary applications, you may have seen that this was an issue and the state refused to allow anybody to use anything but tax records, which is a problem for people who don't have to file taxes. So if you're an Illinois resident and you're trying to prove that your company is cited in Illinois or any other reason that you need to prove that you're an Illinois resident, you can use all sorts of things, including a signed lease agreement with your name on it or the applicant's name on it, a property deed, school records, a voter registration card, driver's license, a paycheck stub, a utility bill. Think about the things that you could bring to the DMV to prove that you live where you say you live. And those are the items that you'll be allowed to use, which is really helpful, especially for things like social equity and Illinois residency.
Okay, great. And so far, we don't yet have additional questions, but I will remind all of the attendees that feel free to ask questions. Okay, so question number 13, if you're following along, what exhibits need to be redacted? What's the difference between redacted and anonymous? Good question.
Yeah, and the state didn't answer it, which is so the exhibits that need to be redacted, I'm going to actually have to look because I didn't write it down right here. I'll look in a moment. The list of exhibits that need to be redacted is listed in the application materials. It's anonymous, excuse me. The exhibits that need to be anonymous are listed in the application materials. I want to distinguish between anonymous and redacted. So anonymous means that as you make the document, as you write your narrative, as you talk about your team, you don't add their names. You use things like principal officer number 1 or office owner number 2 or the cultivation director, or use those types of monikers. If you're talking about the physical property, you're not supposed to talk about its location. And so you can just say the proposed facility, or any number of ways to use it that's not the address or the street name. So just starting off from the beginning with those documents, you can make them anonymous by writing them in a way that doesn't include any identifying information. And that includes phone numbers, addresses, and names. Redaction is something different. Redaction is where you take a block, you block something out. So it's a document that already exists, like a contract, and you take a PDF or even a black marker and black it out so that it's not legible to the people that are reviewing. And so for exhibits that need to be anonymous, you might have a document that was prepared by someone else that you need to redact. Now, the state's not a big fan of redacted documents, so you really only want to do this if you have to. And the number one time that this pops up is actually with your architecture drawings. So you're going to get drawings from your architect, and it's possible that the architect's going to stamp it with your address, possibly your company name or your name, and you're going to want to go in and redact it. If you're if you don't have the equipment to do that, your architect would, I'm sure, be happy to do that for you. It takes 30 seconds. But yeah, so only redact if you have to. Start from scratch, not including anybody's names if you can.
So if you are redacting, you mentioned blacking it out with like a permanent marker. Is that acceptable for an application submission, or do you recommend using what are some of the softwares that redact?
I strongly recommend using Adobe Acrobat. There are free trials available. If you have a Mac, the application called Preview will allow you to do it. Sometimes it doesn't get rid of all the data though, so it's not fully redacted, and that can get a little complicated. So that's why I strongly recommend using Adobe. Black Pen is only if you spent 3 hours trying to redact it, it's not gonna work. Then you use a black pen and scan the document highest quality possible. You really want it to be very legible. So yeah, that's only a backup measure if you can't get anything else to work.
And redaction was something that was new to me when I entered into this space. So for even more clarification, when you do use Adobe, is it called redacting? Is it actually, we might need to look into the actual technical, like does it say the redact on there? So we might not know that.
Yeah, it's called redact. You have to draw a box around it, around the language that you want to redact, and then you have to remove the data, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah, you have to remove the data. And there are tons of really great YouTubes about how to do this online that I have to use. That's why I'm hesitant to give you like firm details.
Yeah, of course. So it sounds like what we are recommending is to build your application to be anonymous, like write it anonymous from an anonymous standpoint, and then only redact when you need to if you're not able to do anything else. But you can Google redact, redaction, redacting, and then you'll become a redacting pro. and that's definitely something to talk about at the dinner table.
I wanted to jump in about the exhibits list.
Yeah.
The exhibits that need to be anonymous are A, B, C, D, E, F, and then H, I, and L, M. So that means the ones that can have identifying information are G, social equity applicant materials, right? That makes sense. You have to be able to show your name and address. J, the Illinois resident controlled or owned exhibit. K, you can include your information for the veteran controlled or owned exhibit. And then N through S are also allowed to be include identifying information. So you want to think about it as like what makes sense. When do the state need to know who you are, and when do they not need to know who you are? And that'll give you an idea of which things need to be anonymous and which don't.
Great, great. Thank you. All right, so let's see, scrolling on down. We are now looking at, so the next one, it looks like so we're going to talk about funding. So what documents will the department accept as evidence to disclosure of all sources of funding?
All right, this is a fun one to talk about. I really love Illinois' broadness when it comes to funding. They'll accept anything. You can take a screenshot of your bank account and that will count as evidence. You can include bank statements that the bank has printed out, broker statements, or if you have some stocks and bonds, you can get a statement from your broker. You can get something prepared by a CPA if you want, that says the CPA has seen everything that you have in your assets and that they confirm that this is up to this amount. One popular way to do it is if you don't want the state to see exactly how much money you have in your account, especially if you have more than you're dedicating to this project, you can get a letter from your bank, and the bank just simply says, this is a customer of our bank and they have more than X number of dollars, and what that X is whatever you're planning to dedicate to the project. So if you're planning to dedicate $50,000, but you have $100,000, don't we all wish, then your bank can send a letter saying they have more than $50,000 in our banking institution, and they sign it, and that's it. It can take a few days to get your bank to send one of those letters, so definitely ask for it in advance.
Okay.
For the big things that you can use, we've had clients who had trouble because they had assets that were hard to prove. So if you have a very specific type of asset, not like a bank account or shareholder shares or things that are hard to prove, like cash or gold or something like that, you may want to talk to an attorney about ways to prove that you have it. Usually it involves an appraisal or a notarized document from like a CPA, like I said, or some other financial professional that looks at it and says, yes, I saw the money, it's there, and it's worth this much. And
okay. So let's talk just a little bit more about this. Most states have funding requirements for the license types. Does Illinois have requirements, minimum requirements for each of the license types?
So the Department of Ag has actually required that you have $20,000 liquid. So you have to prove that you have that. However, the rule in general for the state of Illinois is that you have to prove that you have enough to successfully operate this business. So $20,000 is like bare minimum. What you really want to prove is that you can pay your rent, get up and running, hire all the contractors you need, hire your first round of staff, be able to pay them while they're being trained. Basically operate for 3 to 6 months without getting a single sale. And so at Green Rush, that usually means that we want you to have enough to pay for everything in your budget that's listed in your application. So if you have a bunch of numbers talking about you're going to buy these types of equipment and they're going to cost X number of dollars, then you actually need to have that money already identified and prove it to the state. That's not a requirement, but that's going to make you have a strong, that's going to give you the upper hand with respect to getting points. Now, I do want to point out that the dispensary round of applications, allowed applicants who are social equity applicants who plan to apply for those grants and loans that are available, the low interest loans. They said that you could just include a statement saying you intended to request a loan of X number of dollars and that you would provide proof that you got it later on. And I presume that the Department of Ag also will allow that. So if you don't actually have the cash now, but you intend to participate in the social equity grant and loan program, you can mention that. Also, if you have I meant to mention this earlier, if you have somebody who is interested in investing with you but is a little concerned about it, you can get a letter of intent from them that says, hey, I am interested in participating in this. I'm not giving them the money yet, but I have it and I intend to give it to them. And this is the amount. And then you also need their proof of their documents or their money. So their bank statement or whatever. And then that way you can show that you're going to have access to that should you get your license.
Yep. And we kind of have a standard in-house, you know, if people are asking, well, should I show this? Should I show this? Should I show this? We generally say show everything. The more that you can show, the stronger the application, because you do need to be considering, you know, your competition and what they're going to be showing. So just to specify on the $20,000 requirement, that is as a group, correct? Or is that
$20,000 for the whole application, your whole team? Okay. Together, you have $20,000 and it's dedicated towards this project.
Now, something that we've seen in the past is, you know, as these are new businesses, you know, the multiple people are coming together with their funds. Sometimes we've seen them, you know, channel their funds into a new bank account and they show that as proof of funds. But it also works if the individuals show the funds then collectively. Is that your understanding also, LP?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can. It can be bank accounts from 5 or 6 members of your team. I want to clarify that if you're going to prove that you have the money from a specific bank account, whoever's the named person on that account has to be a disclosed financial interest holder. That's the connection.
Okay.
If they're participating in this particular question, then they also are considered a financial interest holder. And we're going to get into that a little bit further down, but I wanted to clarify that. And also, you can have each person write a letter if you'd like, saying I am a member of this team. I intend to make a loan or whatever. I intend to dedicate this much money to this project once it's up and running.
What about non-liquid cash?
Non-liquid is allowed and totally acceptable here. However, the $20,000 needs to be, from what I understand, $20,000 needs to be liquid. Anything above that can be something that takes a little while to liquefy. So like stocks and bonds are okay as long as you've got the $20,000 first.
Okay, that sounds good. Liquid and need to liquefy, you know, so it's important to understand that. What about lines of credit?
Lines of credit are great. They count as much as cash as long as you have proof that you have that line of credit already approved.
Great. Okay, cool. So if nobody has any other questions about that, let's go on. Do applicants need to submit an operating agreement?
The state says yes, but they don't give a really great response to that question. Where is this operating agreement supposed to go? We're recommending it go in, I believe, the same as the financial, with the financial stuff, I believe. I apologize. I will let you know which exhibit to include it with in a little bit. But I will say that an operating agreement, for those who are unfamiliar, there's a lot of business documents that you guys can create as you're creating your company or organization or LLC. And an operating agreement is basically the business, financial, and functional decisions, including your rules. It's the agreement among all the owners of basically how you're going to operate. It can be really short for right now, but ultimately you're going to want it. It's kind of like your bylaws. Usually people have one or the other, not both. And we're going to talk a little bit more about other documents that the state is requiring in a minute.
Okay, and just it's kind of a word to the wise to have an operating agreement as you are starting up new businesses with individuals, because it does help to dictate how you guys answer questions, you know, how you make decisions. And at the most simplest of levels, the operating agreement helps to define that. So if you have, you know, 2 partners, 3 partners, 5 partners, how do you come to a consensus? If you have 4 partners, how do you come to a consensus if there's a tie? You know, these are really important things to address at the forefront of starting your business that really will help to mitigate any sort of stress down the line, because you've already gone to the effort to, you know, decide how you're going to decide things. And this includes how you may dissolve a relationship, because that, you know, that's a very important conversation to have at the beginning. So, you know, if one person for any reason at all is like, cool, I'm out, you know, I'm gonna go this way, and this is the point here in the operating agreement that you guys can set up the foundation to make for amicable exits in the future. Of course, we want everybody to work together all the time, and but we know that that's not always the case. So just a little, you know, note on good business practices: get your operating agreements in line.
I just wanted to jump in. It's Exhibit P, the organizational information and financial interest disclosures. That's where you're going to include your operating agreement.
Cool.
I also wanted to jump in. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention one thing. When we were talking about, do you need to have a property? And the answer is a resounding yes. You have to have a property identified, even if you don't have the complete lease yet. I want to flag this one thing. You can change your property. That is allowed. However, the minute that you make a substantial change to your company, you have to notify the state. So if you submit your application on February 10th and on February 12th, you guys buy a different property, you have to notify the state on February 10th that you purchased that property, or you risk being disqualified. The state has made that very clear. You have to notify them literally immediately. Usually that means within 12 hours. We don't recommend making any changes between the time that you submit your application and the time that you win your license, unless it's going to help your team. If you've got a way better location with way better specs and better property and everything's wonderful and it's going to give you more points, then absolutely make that change, notify the state. Be aware that they may ask you to redo all your drawings, redo all of your sections that talk about your property, because those things are all impacted by the location and what the facility looks like and all of those things. So I just wanted to flag that changes have to be made and the state has to be notified immediately, and the state can find out pretty easily when those changes are made. So definitely be careful to notify them right away, or you're going to get disqualified.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Always play it safe. Let them know. Okay, so what requirements exist for a security company contracting with a license? Can the security company be an out-of-state company? Must the security agreement have a labor peace agreement with its employees?
These are all great questions. And again, the state sort of sidestepped answering. Just if you're following along with the Q&As, this is question number 28. You don't, for this round of applications, the Department of Ag does not require you to currently identify the security company you're going to engage with, which is really nice. The dispensary, for those who didn't know, the dispensary round, you actually had to contract with your security company, security vendor before you even knew that you got a license, which was frustrating. So they don't require that. All they require is that you submit this security plan. Now, hiring or working with a subject matter expert who knows a lot about security will actually benefit you. We worked with one. So if you're working with the application Accelerator documents, we worked with a great security expert to develop it. However, it's not highly specific to your project. And so if you can have an expert look at it, make a little bit of adjustments, add some more detail, make it specific to your project, it will help you get points. The state, you may have seen that the state requires that your security plan be approved by the state police, the Illinois State Police. In these Q&As, they said you don't actually have to get that approval in advance. They'll do that later on once they award licenses. So that's nice. You don't have to get that approval, but you don't need to identify your security person, right, or company right now. As far as a labor peace agreement with your employees, it's always great to have one, but it's not required.
Okay. All right. Pretty cool. Now let's see. I'm going to scroll down to craft grower questions specifically. So this is question number 5 under craft grower. Exhibit B mentions a handbook. Is the handbook considered in the scoring of the craft grower applications?
So the state actually in the application instructions, they tell you to develop an employee handbook and submit it to them, but then there's a page limit, and your handbooks are going to be a lot longer than that page limit. And the handbook's only one part of that exhibit. So what we're recommending and what we're doing with the application accelerator is we're talking about what will be in the handbook. We're talking about the table of contents. We're talking about what types of things are going to be included in that. So basically the idea is that the handbook exists or will exist, and these are all the topics that are going to occur in it. It's the same with when the state asks for standard operating procedures or SOPs. SOPs are very long and lengthy and detailed, and the state often asks for SOPs, but you can't provide that with actually like page limits. So you just sort of, you summarize it for them, and they love to see things like tables of contents. So that's how we've handled it with the accelerator, and you guys can build in more detail into your exhibit.
Okay. So kind of like making sure to include a reference to it, to executive summary, table of contents, something along those lines with that. Okay, let's see. Any questions from the room? Not at the moment. Let's see. Question number 9. Are there restrictions on an individual or entity that is awarded a craft grower license applying for an adult use cultivator center license in the future? Ooh, can you do that?
A great question. It's the same limitations that currently exist. So if you operate a craft growing facility, you can only have one license, right? And you can only have one cultivation center license. However, the state may change that, just so you guys know. It's totally within their right. That happens sometimes. They may come back and change their minds about who's allowed to own what. Usually it makes it broader, not more restrictive, but just so you guys are aware. Also, there are specific limitations on people who are participating in publicly held companies. And what's a publicly held company? If you don't know if your company is publicly held, I can tell you right now that it's not. It's not a publicly held company. The Securities Exchange Act sort of limits who's allowed to participate in multiple facilities that are related to one another. The idea is to avoid monopolization. So for public companies, there is more limitations, but they're
Great.
just basically the same.
Okay, thank you. So we're rolling through these questions, and I'm going to take a break, a quick moment to mention about our application accelerator product. For those of you that are on the line that I see that there's a couple of you who have already utilized the application accelerator, which is an automated application generator that essentially gets you halfway through the application process by answering answering questions, and then you will immediately receive a completed and compliant written document that pertains to that specific exhibit. And so right now we're doing pre-sales, and for anyone who is social equity, we do have the specials that we're offering. Please call our office to find out about that. And we're also going to be at the Cannabis Resource Fair February 1st in Chicago, and we're super excited about that. If you are able to do a pre-order before then, we're going to be able to have this time set aside to sit with you and your team and, you know, problem solve, walk through the application, strategize, you know, really what have you. In addition, coming with that is our preferred vendor list, in which when we were talking about security, want to make sure to mention one of our preferred partners, which is Sapphire Risk Security. We've worked with them on quite a few applications now, and they have helped to build our securities out in the past. And so Sapphire Risk is a really good group to work with. In addition, we'll have some few others. So, all right, back to questions. Let's go for an infuser question. Okay, so for infusers, for Exhibit A, the department asks for an operations and practices management plan. The definition for an operation and practices management plan seems to apply mainly to craft growers. How should an infuser complete Exhibit A?
That is such a great question, and the state did not respond to it. So excuse me, I'm gonna look at my notes. We're gonna talk a little bit about what's required by Exhibit A and how an infuser could figure out how to participate, or even a craft grower, because craft growers have probably the same question. So Exhibit A is asking for you to demonstrate that the facility is suitable for effective and safe cultivation of cannabis. But if you're not cultivating, how do transporters and infusers answer this question? My strong recommendation is to just pretend that cultivation of cannabis reads whatever activity you're participating in. So transportation of cannabis or infusion of cannabis. So demonstrate the proposed facility is suitable for the transportation of cannabis. How would you do that? You would say that we have great security. We're going to make sure that, I'm sorry. Oh, and also this particular section is addressed, this issue is addressed in the application accelerator material. So if you purchase this for infuser or for transportation, you don't have to worry about it because we've dealt with it. But the way you do it is just kind of the basic things, like we're a safe and secure facility, that neighbors are going to love us. We're going to make sure that there's no smell or complaints. We're going to have a community benefits coordinator who's going to, or excuse me, a community liaison who's going to be available to take complaints from the neighbors and those types of things. We're going to work with the city to make sure that we're safe and all of that. And then that's the second question for Exhibit A, is to demonstrate the ability to meet consumer demand by operating your transportation facility. And so you're going to talk about how you're going to be able to scale your growth so that as things grow bigger, you're able to meet them, that you're going to be able to have enough money to hire the initial staff, that you're going to be able to make the relationships that you need to make to be able to support all of the facilities that you're going to be providing. Either materials or transportation to. And then the third part of that question is to provide an operations and management practices plan. And that's explaining how you're going to operate things like everything from training to SOPs. So how your team is going to work together, how experienced your team is, and how you're going to put that experience to good use. And again, we've addressed this in the application accelerator materials. And so you can see a little bit about how we've described that. And then you can go in and put a little bit of information about what makes your team stand out so that it's more detailed.
Great. Great. So we're starting to get near the end of our time. I wanted to be sure to hit on that zoning question that we mentioned earlier. So for this is a specific zoning question for Exhibit O. Is it sufficient for an application to have applied for zoning approval, or must approval be obtained? When is the latest that an application may receive final zoning approval?
Yeah, this is another one where the state didn't really provide a lot of information. However, this question is answered a little bit in the application instructions, but it's not very clear. The idea is that you have to prove that either your local area has no zoning rules, Or if they have the zoning rules, you're going to follow them. And there's different ways to prove that. So if there are no rules, the way that you prove that is you get that zoning form signed by the local zoning authority. If you're operating in within city limits, that's going to be somebody within the city. Usually it's the planning commission. If you call the city clerk, they'll be able to tell you exactly who to contact. And they will, it takes a little bit of time to work with cities. They have a lot of bureaucracy to navigate. So don't assume that this is going to take you a day to get done. You want to contact them as soon as possible. Maybe even before you have the location completely firmed up. If you know what city you're going to operate in, call the city and say, how do I get this done? And get prepared and follow the steps that they tell you to do that. So if there's no rules, you just get the zoning officer to sign it off, and there's a box for them to check, and it says there's no rules, et cetera, we're cool with this. Okay. Now, if there are rules already in place, sometimes the rules make you jump through some hoops, and sometimes they don't. And either way, you're going to do the same process. You're going to take that document and you're going to bring it to your local zoning authority. The only difference is you're also going to submit, in addition to the signed document, you're going to submit a copy of the rules so that the state knows what the rules are. If there is a complicated local application process that you participate in, whether it's a conditional use program process or something, conditional use permit that you have to get, or some other license or permit that the state is going to make you get, then you need to follow the rules as much as you can. So if the deadline is after the deadline for the state, then you just say, we're participating in this process. Here's a copy of the application. Here's a copy of the local rules. Here's a signed document from the city saying that we are trying to comply. We just can't yet. So that's the hypothetical in the question is, what do we do if we've applied but we haven't gotten approval yet? And the answer is submit everything that you've got to the state along with Exhibit O, showing that you're participating in the process, but you also do have to get that form signed. Okay. So that's how you handle zoning approval.
In a quick 30-second blip. So, you know, zoning approval, when you are working with these bureaucracies, you definitely, one key thing is you definitely want to be sure that you're talking to the person who actually makes the decisions about those. You know, you could be talking to somebody who can be, you know, feeding you along, and then you find out a month later that you were actually not talking to a person that had anything to do with what you were needing to talk about. So
that's absolutely true. That's true. And you won't get local approval until you're talking to the right person. I do want to point out that it doesn't identify who the zoning authority is on that form. So
that's interesting. So maybe it's assuming that it is, and you know, we never want to assume in any of these processes, but that it's up to the local
right.
jurisdictions.
Right.
So
I'm going to clarify one other thing. I started going down a path and didn't finish it. So if you're operating in the city limits, you're going to contact the city clerk. If you're outside of city limits, it's the county that you're going to be contacting. And each county is organized a little bit differently, but they usually have a clerk's office or someone similar to that. You can also call the, in California, it's called the Board of Supervisors. Whatever body is in control of the county ordinances, they will usually have a person who can answer that question and point you in the right direction. But they do have they're going to have a zoning authority for the county as well. And then you follow the same steps just for the county.
Doing a webinar on conditional use permits in the future might be kind of fun. But that's it. That's something that our team is really good at in winning conditional use permits. I've personally participated in some where there's hearings that you have to get up in front of people and it's just a different process. So maybe we'll flag that for the future if we get enough requests for.
Totally, we're really good at that. I think we're at 100%.
Yeah, I think so. Like I actually really kind of love that sort of stuff, and I know that other members on our team do too, because that's really where we get to shine and where we can help the applicants shine, because it's actually working with people directly versus you know, just the application. So let's see. I think maybe
Sarah, I wanted to make two little points, if you don't mind me jumping in.
yeah.
Well, we're not equipped to let you know whether or not your team qualifies as social equity applicants. If you're applying as a social equity applicant, you can't call us and say, hey, do we qualify? We don't know. We can say this is what the state requires and it seems like maybe, but we can't provide much support. But what we can tell you is that the state seems to be very lenient as to if you submit things that don't constitute sufficient evidence regarding social equity status. So if you're a social equity applicant, you submit everything, but you're not sure it's right, the state has been very lenient in saying, we'll give you 10 more days we'll contact you and say what's missing. So at least you won't be disqualified immediately. So that's nice to hear. I just wanted to put your mind at ease as far as social equity status, that the state will give you a second bite at the apple, basically, with respect to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
The other section, the other thing I wanted to mention, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes for a moment. Oh, I know what it was. List of experts that it's good to work with. So we didn't really touch on what drawings you have to have, but you do have to have a plot plan and architectural drawings. They need to be to scale. That's why we recommend using an architect. There are other experts that we recommend you working with as you develop your team and you build your application and your company to set you up for success. And those are a cultivation expert. We had a cultivation expert at several actually who helped develop the application accelerator, but you're still going to want to have one on your team. A processing and extraction expert if you plan to participate in those activities. You want to get an attorney on retainer who can help you with business development and field random questions about corporate stuff. Have that on retainer and be able to call them right away and get their attention right away. If you wait until you have a problem, it can take a couple of weeks to get their attention if you don't have a retainer already set up. Find yourself an architect or an engineer. An engineer can draw things to scale and they're cheaper. And then also start identifying insurance carriers and bond providers. You don't need to have that one just yet, but like keep an ear out for it because they can take a little while to organize, and you'll need that right before basically the minute that you get your state approval, you're going to need an insurance carrier and a bond provider.
And did you mention a financial person? I didn't know if
I didn't. It's really great to have a financial officer that's part of your team who can help you with all of that stuff. Sarah is more of our financial maven. If you want to explain why that's a wonderful thing for your team, please do.
Oh yeah, it's just foundational for a successful business regardless. There's daily questions on how you're operating with who and all of those things, down to how much you're charging for what, how much you're paying staff. You know, everything really comes down to the bottom line when you're running a business. And so it's critical that you have somebody on your team who understands numbers, who understands the numbers in the industry and the taxes around that as well. Because that's a whole other, you know, kit and caboodle of questions there. But, you know, if you don't have a financial person, start the hunt for, you know, adding that person to your team in some capacity, even if it's simply as an advisor, to have somebody that you can ask those questions to. So I think that kind of wraps up our questions for the day.
We have one question to pose to the audience. Dr. Tom Galarraga, who participated in the last webinar, and he's really a lovely guy and extremely experienced and skilled. He is having trouble figuring out what color tie to wear, and he asked me to ask you guys what color tie you should wear for the next webinar. So if you have a response, please add it to the chat box.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we will be doing another webinar next week. It will be on Thursday again. So we're going to hop back to our Thursday at 3 Central Standard Time. And we'll also then be doing another FAQ one when the state comes out with additional FAQs. So in addition, once you purchase an accelerator, then you will also get access to additional webinars that we'll be doing and some additional supports. But these webinars are for everyone. You know, our goal is to really help to disseminate the information more broadly to help individuals get through this very complex process. We've been there, and we have some recent successes in California here that we're very excited about, and we're really excited about what Illinois is doing in particular as it relates to social equity. So we're here for you. If you're interested in learning about what we're offering for social equity applicants with the application accelerator, please call our offices. You can also see the rundown of what the product is on our website, which I'm sure you know if you're here what our website is, but greenrushconsulting.com. And it's all within our store. You can actually purchase it on there. But again, if you're a social equity qualifying applicant, call us so that you can get a special code and discount just for you. We are in pre-order phase right now, so we will be releasing our products starting on the 1st and then having releases after that for the various different license types. So if you're at the Cannabis Resource Fair, which I hope that you're able to go to, it sounds like a historic event and gathering of really awesome people who are doing the work in Illinois. We will be there. We will have a table, and we'll have a special breakout room to walk people through the accelerators, to answer questions. Our team is going to be there loud and proud, and just trying to meet with as many people as possible. And we're really excited about this. So outside of that, I guess we'll see you next week on our webinars, and then we'll see you in Chicago.